What is up, guys? It is Quinn here, and in this video, I'm going to be running through my Week 16 tight end start sits. So this is where I'm going to be going through every single Week 16 matchup, and then listing every fantasy-relevant tight end as either a start, fringe option, or a sit. I do want to clarify that when I am making these videos, my goal is not to label 12 different tight ends as starts, because in my opinion, the tight ends that I'm listing as starts, these are players that you are throwing into your starting lineup with confidence. Obviously, at the tight end position, you're probably only confident, starting like Travis Kelce, but I think you guys kind of understand what I'm saying. And I think you guys can all probably agree that there are not going to be 12 tight ends that you love starting on a week-to-week basis, and that's okay. You can have a fantastic fantasy team and not have a tight end that I have listed as a start. You may have attacked other positions early on in your draft and, still have a very, very strong team. So the fringe options are going to be more of your back-end tight end ones, your high-end tight end twos. You're kind of just throwing darts on these guys. Hopefully they hit, a decent week for you. And then the sits, pretty self-explanatory, guys that you do not want touching your lineups. As always, if you enjoy the content, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. And then if you have any fantasy questions, if you drop them down below, I'll be getting back to every single person. But let's jump into the Thursday night game where we have the Jaguars taking on the Jets. And starting it off here with the Jaguars and Evan Ingram, I feel like we got to have this man as a locked-in start. He has put up 3 straight impressive weeks. He had a 5 for 30 and a touchdown, that monster 11 for 162 and 2 touchdown day, and then this past week, 8 receptions for 62 yards. His PPR point totals over those 3 weeks, 14, 39.2, and 14.2. Over the past 3 games, he has been targeted 32 times. His route participation continues to be fantastic. This Jaguars offense is peaking, and I think Evan Ingram is someone who is locked into your fantasy lineups. And he's someone where he may have been a streaming option for you, and all of a sudden you probably are starting him with a fair amount of confidence. On the other side with the Jets, there have been times throughout the season where Tyler Conklin has been, like a fringe option, giving you some decent production. Unfortunately, we just haven't seen either of these tight ends truly take over. We saw CJ Uzomah have a big day. He scored 2 touchdowns, but the man only ran 11 routes on 40 dropbacks, so just a complete fluke game. Tyler Conklin led the tight ends in routes run, but he ran 22 routes on 40 dropbacks, so he's not getting it done either. Both of these guys are going to be sits. I just don't think either guy is going to be playable moving forward. For the Falcons Ravens matchup, Falcons, per usual, nothing going on, sitting Michael Pruitt. And then for the Ravens, I know Mark Andrews has been disappointing, but with Lamar, I think probably making his return this week, what are we going to do besides fire him up as a strong start again? We know he has a very, very high week-to-week ceiling. The recent production has definitely been bad, but I'm still going to trust Mark Andrews in my lineup. In this Lions-Panthers matchup, we actually had Brock Wright score a long touchdown, but in terms of being a consistent fantasy option, definitely going to be a sit. And then for the Panthers, sitting Tommy Tremble. Next up, we have the Bills taking on the Bears, and I've actually elevated Dawson Knox to be a start. He was someone that I really liked coming into the season. He had been basically a zero, up until a few weeks ago. He's been very impressive over the past 2 weeks. I think he's peaking at the right time. Last 2 weeks, 4 for 41 and a touchdown. Then this past week, a big game, 6 for 98 and a touchdown. He actually led the team in receiving yards in both of those games. Very rare at the tight end position, unless your name is Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews. So it is impressive out of Dawson Knox. I think he has established himself as a solid option. Now, I'm not going to say he's up there with some of the top fantasy tight ends. He's definitely more to the bottom tier of being a starting option. But when we're looking at the tight end landscape, there's not going to be, 10 plus guys that I like more than Dawson Knox moving forward. His route participation is always solid. And I think this Bills offense is going to put up a lot of points against the Bears, which is going to give him some nice touchdown upside. On the other side for the Bears, I think Cole Kmet is one of these fringe options where you plug him into your lineup and hope he's able to get into the end zone or, break a long play. Next game, we have the Saints taking on the Browns. And I did strongly consider putting Juwan Johnson as a start. I think if you wanted to argue he is a start, I wouldn't push back super hard. At this point, I have him as a high-end fringe option, and he just continues to score touchdowns. I believe he scored 7 touchdowns in the past 7 games. It's a pretty wild thing because it's not like he was some highly touted tight end coming into the season. He's not really giving you crazy volume, And it's not like he's on some, crazy offense. Like the Saints offense is not putting up a ton of points, but this man just continues to get into the end zone. I mean, he's probably why I got to talk about Alvin Kamara being so disappointing every week and not being able to get into the end zone because Juwan Johnson is just, basically vulturing all of them. So I think he's a high-end fringe play. This game kind of has like a grimy game script written all over it. So we'll see if he can keep it rolling. For the Browns, David Njoku coming off of a down game, but I still think he's a very solid start moving forward. A mid-tier tight end one. Then we have the Seahawks taking on the Chiefs. And even though we saw Noah Fant have a solid day on Thursday night, he is still operating in a full-on 50-50 split with Will Dissly. I think long-term this season has been encouraging for Noah Fant. He's shown flashes, but in terms of being like a solid fantasy option that you want to play, I just can't really be, trying to start someone in a 50-50 split, especially like if you can't really pull away from Will Dissly, it's not ideal. Maybe they give him a slight bump in usage with Lockett potentially being out, but that's not something I really want to bank on this week. For the Chiefs, no brainer. Travis Kelce, fire that man up as the tight end one. Then we have the Giants taking on the Vikings. Daniel Bellinger kind of fallen off as of late. Hasn't really been able to regain what he had going on before the eye injury. He's a sit for me. TJ Hawkinson, kind of a disappointing performance in a game where basically every other weapon on the Vikings went nuclear, but I still think he's a solid start. He sees really strong volume week to week, which, makes him a reliable option. Next up is the Bengals taking on the Patriots. I'm not sure if Hayden Hurst is actually going to be able to suit up in this game, but if he can play and return this week, I think he'll be a fringe option. For the Patriots, Hunter Henry is someone that I've kind of gone back and forth with from like a fringe to a sit. He actually had decent route participation this past week. This offense really just hasn't done enough to support these weapons, in it. So in a fantasy football semifinal, I would definitely hope there's a better option out there than Hunter Henry. In this divisional matchup between the Texans and the Titans, going to be sitting at Jordan Akins. And then for the Titans, I think if you're semi-desperate, I think Okonkwo is a decent fringe play, probably a high-end tight end too. He is in a pretty solid split with Hooper, but over the past 3-4 weeks, he's been pretty consistently involved. So someone to look at. I do think if Treylon Burks returns, it probably bumps him down to a sit, but we'll kind of see how that plays out throughout the week. Next up is the Commanders taking on the 49ers. For the Commanders, really not much going on at the tight end position, sitting Logan Thomas. For the 49ers, George Kittle had been pretty disappointing. Then he goes out and probably just wins you your week on Thursday Night Football. You just always have to be starting a guy like Kittle because even though his week-to-week floor may be low, he is clearly one of the best tight ends in the NFL and can always give you those spike weeks, especially with Deebo Samuel out. I think, he's potentially in range to do it again. So I do like Kittle as a high-end tight end one play. Then in a divisional game between the Eagles and the Cowboys, I think if Dallas Goedert is able to make his return, I think you fire him up as a start, even though he's missed time coming off of IR and without Jalen Hurts. I think Minshew can support these weapons. For the Cowboys, Dalton Schultz coming off of a down game, his usage was still elite. His route participation was fantastic. Someone who I think can still be relied on as a tight end one. Then we have the Raiders taking on the Steelers, and we saw Darren Waller playing his first game off of IR. Nothing crazy, solid game fantasy-wise. 3 targets, 3 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown. Now, they kind of eased him back into this offense. He didn't step back into his full-on workload. He was actually outsnapped by Foster Moreau, had a 66% route participation. That's definitely much lower than a healthy Darren Waller would see. I'm expecting to see his role increased heading into Week 16, and I do think he is a starting option. Pat Freiermuth, unfortunately, coming off of a goose egg. I considered dropping him to a fringe, but you just look at him throughout the season. He's been a fairly consistent option. Raiders definitely don't have some lockdown defense, so I think Pat Freiermuth is still on the back end of a starting option. Then we have the Packers taking on the Dolphins. 2 guys who could have had some potential this season, but Robert Tonyan and Mike Gesicki just not getting it done. Then we have the Broncos and the Rams. 2 guys that have kind of been flirting as fringe options over the past, 5-6 weeks. Greg Dulcich for the Broncos, down game, maybe gets Russell Wilson back this week, will probably help his fantasy value. And then Tyler Higbee, at the time that I'm recording this, I do not have the actual numbers on his route participation. His route participation had really fallen off, but he goes out on Monday night and leads the team in targets. Obviously, didn't do anything crazy. He didn't get into the end zone. I think that's good enough to make him a fringe option, but not someone who I love moving forward. Then we have the Buccaneers taking on the Cardinals. K. Dotton and Cam Brate continue to split snaps, sit in both of them. Trey McBride actually had a decent day, but with the quarterback situation on a bad offense, not someone I want to be playing for fantasy. And then the final game of the week, the Chargers taking on the Colts. I think you can continue to fire up Gerald Everett as a fringe play, probably a high-end tight end too. And then the Colts really are just going full-on tight end by committee. Mo Alley Cox, Kylan Granson, Jelani Woods, all three of them, splitting the opportunities. So obviously none of those guys are going to be startable. And that is going to wrap it up for all 16 Week 16 matchups. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, drop them down below. Stay tuned for my running back and wide receiver rankings. Those are going to be coming out tomorrow. But thank you guys for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.